are watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, as always, great to be back alongside you.
It's great to be back alongside you, Eugene. What a world we're living in.
What a world we're living in. And if people are worried, we have not changed studios. I'm just in a different location today because of yesterday's federal holiday, Juneteenth, celebrating the end of slavery. Well, celebrating at least one aspect of the end of slavery. You can definitely check out the great conversation we did with the Dr. Gerald Horne last year on Juneteenth for the true story. But yes, what a world, a lot of things happening. And that is why we did not want to take a week off, because there is so much here. There's so much to discuss. And I would just say, as I always do, for those who are watching on YouTube, this would be a great time for you to go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you can get the alerts for the things you subscribe to, so you don't have to look very far for all of the fantastic content coming out here on Breakthrough News. In addition to what we are doing on the freedom side, you have great shows like Dispatches with Rania Khalek that's been putting out quite a number of fantastic episodes in recent days, and also some great lives that you should be checking out as well in relationship to everything we'll be talking about here today. So yes, hit subscribe, hit the bell so you can get the alerts for the things you subscribe to. And everybody watching on Free Speech TV, don't need you to do anything else except keep watching and keep supporting FSTV. And a big shout out to the whole Free Speech TV team, as always, for making it possible for us to appear on that platform as well. Rania, are there other things you would like our viewers to know as we get started here today?
Yes, as we wait to find out if we're going to have a nuclear summer or not, I feel like it's super important. You know, Eugene, I have been spending a lot of my time sitting in front of the television watching CNN so you don't have to. And one thing I've noticed is CNN is like state propaganda. It is just one segment after another, unquestioningly promoting lies about Iran to condition the public to support U.S. joining the Israeli insane criminal aggression against that country, which would just open a Pandora's box of catastrophe. And the reason I bring that up, Eugene, is because independent media is more important than ever. The war drums are beating like I have never seen before. Or maybe I have seen it before. It just was a long time ago. It's like deja vu, but on steroids. So if you support independent media, if you appreciate what we bring to you here at Breakthrough News, please consider becoming a member. Go to patreon.com/Breakthrough News for as little as $5 a month. You can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch, like this really cool mug to get you through the nuclear summer. I'm going to normalize that phrase.
Let's not.
Although I'm not sure because nuclear summer sounds kind of cool as opposed to nuclear winter. Like people might think it's a party. You know, like nuclear winter sounds scary and dark, but nuclear summer sounds like, oh.
Let's just go no nuclear seasons.
No.
Let's go with
Well,
the
we
regular
don't want
season.
nuclear. We don't want. Well, that's why you should watch Breakthrough News, because we're going to tell you why that's a bad thing. Where I know, seriously, Eugene, I was watching, there was some Republican representative on CNN earlier today, and he was just, the anchor didn't even push back, and he was like, yeah, if we don't destroy Iran, they're going to nuke Israel, and then they're going to attach a nuke to an intercontinental ballistic missile and nuke the U.S. And the anchor was just like, oh, is that what the intelligence was saying? And he's like, well, I don't really have any intelligence to back it up, but I'm pretty sure that's what will happen. And then there was no follow-up after that. I was like, what? So patreon.com/Breakthrough News, more important than ever. And we're going to be talking about Iran later in the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess par for the course for Congress, no intelligence. I think pretty much every issue we could say that.
Right.
Right. Well, let's get ready to get the show going here. I certainly agree, and big shout out, by the way, to all our existing patrons. We really appreciate you and everything that you've done so far. And we want to open here on one of the stories that's certainly roiling the United States, but I'm sure people around the world are seeing quite a bit about this. And this is the ongoing immigration crackdown, just the wave of terror being put forward by all of these various federal forces that Trump has deployed all across the country, although, of course, most notably in Los Angeles, as people have seen. And we are very, very honored to be joined on the show as we continue our discussion by Alfonso Espino, who is an immigrant rights organizer in Colorado. Alfonso, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Eugene. Kanye, really big fan of the show, obviously.
Well, it's great to have you here, and we were talking a little bit earlier before we went live about how you're seeing a lot in the mainstream media that like raids and things like that are happening, but you're not getting the same sense as if you're on Instagram or other things where these videos of people just being essentially disappeared off the street are happening. So I was hoping you could just start by talking about the intensity of this crackdown, because I feel like that isn't fully reflected in a lot of the mainstream coverage about what Trump has put forward here.
Yeah, well, I think it has to be noted that I think we have to go back to, um, decades of U.S. immigration policy and imperialist wars abroad and economic sanctions and trade deals, because the intensity of these raids aren't necessarily out of tune with what we've seen for a very long time. I think it's just, for better or for worse, much more apparent under the Trump administration. And also, they're also being very intense and open about their policies. I think that that's a distinguishing factor between the Trump administration's immigration policy and crackdown, and, in comparison to their predecessors like the Obama administration and the Biden administration, and all the democratic institutional people that are still in power that are supposed to be against Trump, that have built the framework for somebody like Trump and this administration to be able to do these sort of crackdowns.
I think that the way it's getting covered in the media, and this is what Trump's intention is, because this is how Trump is framing it. Trump and the people in his cabinet are framing this as like, we're going after violent criminals. And in the media, they kind of repeat that line. And it's sort of how it's always been framed when it comes to raids and deportations, is like, oh, it's going after criminals. But like the media has been covering a bit more because it's Trump doing it. The aggressiveness of these tactics, and they are quite aggressive. And so I want you to talk a bit about what we're seeing happen here. I mean, we're talking about raids at workplaces, arrests at court hearings, and then these so-called collateral arrests, which are targeting people's family members. So I'm curious if you can explain the reality of what's taking place versus this idea that like Trump is going after violent criminals, because this is really, really terrorizing people.
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, in Denver, we're seeing much of what you just described, Rania. These court crackdowns where people are coming out of their hearings, where they're going to these hearings, trying to do things the so-called right way, and they're being targeted immediately after coming out of court. So people are being intimidated into not showing up into court, so that they could then fall out of line from this legal system. We're seeing these targeted raids in workplaces all across the country. I've heard about it happening here. I don't think it's as widespread in the city of Denver, but I have heard and seen a lot of cases of, all of the suburbs in the periphery of the Denver metro area. We've certainly seen images coming out from across the country of these workplace raids. And I think that it's really, it's really crazy just to think about like what's happening, because we have a media narrative that's really focused on Trump. But I'll use the example here in Colorado. There was a whistleblower that just came out in the state of Colorado that basically came out and said that Governor Jared Polis here in the state of Colorado, is working with ICE to make sure that they get information for young people that are seeking asylum. Right. And so they're corroborating with ICE. They're handing over information. These are not criminals. These are asylum seekers. These are people in asylum. And they're just handing over the information. They're working directly with this administration, despite the show that many Democrats, not just here in Colorado, but across the country, are trying to put up of some sort of resistance. What we're actually seeing is, the two sides of more or less the same coin working together, sometimes more overtly, sometimes more, underground, so to speak. But they're working together, and this wouldn't be possible. The intensity of these raids would not be possible without some sort of cooperation in, democratic states, democratic cities, where that's the case. Because it's not just that ICE is, out here in the Wild West, just doing what they want, doing what they please, not, communicating with other local agencies. Far from it, right? They have to coordinate with the people in the courthouses. They have to coordinate and let them know that they're going to be doing these things, or else they wouldn't be so brazen about it.
No, I think that's a very well taken point. And we saw the story about the LAPD sharing the license plate data, with DHS and others to track people down, which, in and of itself is very dystopian. And I was hoping you could also talk about what we're seeing in terms of people standing up, because I think that's been sort of the other aspect of this. Like, for instance, we were talking at the outset of this interview about a lot of the videos coming out of people, being snatched off the street. But the other aspect of a lot of those videos is people standing up for people and trying to, do what they can do to stand up for people's legal rights in these moments, sometimes themselves being arrested because of it, in addition to the mass protest. So it's not as if it's just sort of a blank slate of a reign of terror, but it does seem that it's also sparked a certain amount of resistance, both in immigrant communities and non-immigrant communities who just feel that this is wrong.
Yeah, most certainly, Eugene. I think it's so important for people to not just focus on the dominant corporate media narratives that are focused on the intensity of the raids. There has been a really huge uptick in resistance to these policies, protecting, coming out. I've seen videos from across the country of, ICE agents that are, looking like Gestapo agents, like covering their faces. They don't want to show who they are, oftentimes, coming up to families, breaking them up, and you don't even know that they're ICE agents, right? I think that's the terrifying part about what's happening across the country, that these people are hiding behind their faces, they're hiding their faces, they're, coming up to people, snatching them off the streets, and there has been responses all across the country, not just in like the Southwest, not just in the West Coast, where obviously there's like large populations of, over here, especially Mexican and Latin American populations, but all across the country, because it's terrorizing people. It's not just immigrants that are being terrorized, right? We've seen the intimidation of all sorts of people across the spectrum, of organizers, the terrorizing of family members who are here, with legal status and all of that. And they're being targeted regardless. And it's been really impressive to see. And the only thing that I want to add to just, how great it is to see all of this resistance, it's that it's not new. It's something that I remember when I was a little kid in 2006 for the Day Without Immigrant protests, right? And it was, for all intents and purposes, a general strike of the immigrant population, documented and undocumented, that came out in the millions. And I think that organizers today, people today, need to look to our history and see that when we resist, it's the only way that we can win. My father, for example, was undocumented. He came here to this country, after the privatization of a lot of what was happening in Mexico with the free trade deals. This is prior to NAFTA. And then obviously NAFTA got signed and it became even worse in rural towns in Mexico, like where I'm from. And even then there was always resistance. And under a Republican administration, which was Reagan in the 80s, masses of people that were undocumented at the time were able to be, normal. Their status was able to be normalized. They got their documentation after the fact. So it's not that we're just demonstrating and resisting just for the sake of it. It's because we need to build the mass movement that's necessary to win these sort of battles. We have history as our guide, that we're not crazy. This is something that we can do, and we have an obligation to do in order to stand up for our families and loved ones and friends and neighbors that are being terrorized currently by this administration and its accomplices.
Yeah, I think that's all really important, that people are staying involved and not letting fear overtake them. But I do want to ask you about the fact that there has, of course, been this massive backlash by the Trump administration, by the US government, towards people that are protesting and organizing against these terroristic ICE raids. You had all of these pro-immigrants' rights groups receive letters even a couple weeks ago from some members of Congress demanding that they release their communications and accusing them of organizing violence. So I'm just curious how people are, if that's causing people, I don't know, to feel maybe fearful about getting involved, or if people are pushing past that because of the importance of making sure that, people are protected who otherwise, are in vulnerable positions and can't come out and, show their faces against this because they might be undocumented.
Yeah, well, it's certainly, trying times in that case, right? Because it is definitely a tactic of intimidation that's meant to intimidate us out of the streets, to not allow us to build the mass and popular forces that are out there, right? I think one thing that needs to be pointed out is that the Trump administration's so-called policies of, mass deportation are not popular policies, right? There's people within the Trump base that are against this, right? You hear about, all these industries that are being targeted in workplace raids who are saying that they're doing things by the book. And these things are not only not popular amongst the majority of Americans, but even sections and meaningful sections of the Trump administration's base is also being impacted in a way that, they are not supportive of these sort of policies. And just to get back to the question, it is certainly a tactic of intimidation. And what people can't allow themselves to do is to be intimidated off of the streets, because that is the purpose of these sort of policies, of these sort of letters that are being sent out to all these organizations that are standing up against the violence of the state. And so it's important that people aren't intimidated. It's understanding. It's not crazy to be scared. Most certainly, we have the right to have a little bit of fear, but if we are serious about building a popular movement, if we're serious about fighting back against these policies and this administration and any side of the two corporate parties, then we have a duty to resist. Many people like myself, I was born here in the United States to, immigrants. And that is a sort of reason why people like myself, especially, right, have, in my opinion, an obligation to not be intimidated, because people without documentation most certainly will be much more fearful. We hear it, we see it, and despite that, we have an obligation to not only not be scared, but to fight, organize, and build that popular movement that we see ebbing in the streets, because that's exactly why they need to intimidate us, because they wouldn't be trying to intimidate us. They wouldn't be trying to send all these letters to all these organizations doing great work, standing up for our immigrant communities, if it wasn't for the fact that it's working, right? That the fact that ICE comes and does raids and people show up in their neighborhood without any sort, just organically to defend their community is a danger and a threat to the policies of this administration. And so that's what we need to lead with. We can't be intimidated off of the streets, because we have to keep growing this movement.
Well, a lot to keep covering, and I think this movement will keep moving on. And Alfonso, we really appreciate you being willing to join us. Alfonso Espino, immigrant rights organizer from the state of Colorado. Thanks so much for being with us here on the show.
Much love, and really appreciate the time.
Right on. Rania?
Well, Eugene, it's so wild how just a week ago the news was completely dominated by these anti-ICE protests that Trump was calling the National Guard on. And now, we're whiplash into a potential massive U.S. war that's already basically a U.S. war, but could deepen tremendously. And so this stuff is still happening, though. Like it's like every single time, the gears shift in this insane world we live in now, where like the ruling class has just gone completely glitching all the time. It's hard to keep up with the fact that these ICE raids are still happening. People are still protesting them, and the U.S. government is still coming down very hard. And Trump still has a plan to try to use the military to suppress protests against this. So I'm glad that we can keep covering it.
Yeah, and we will keep covering, because, that's the thing about the 24-hour news cycle. The news is always looking to move on to the new thing, because they want to keep you locked in 24 hours a day, always watching, always scrolling, always going through. So they have the luxury of switching. And, obviously, I have my own critiques of social media, but it is kind of the value in a way, is that people posting ICE raids and protests and things like that you can sort of see a different side of it, which I think is notable. But we want to go to a very, very critical front in this same struggle of people standing up for their rights. And that is, our brothers and sisters, the workers in the fields, the people who are making it possible for us to eat every day, who, I think many of us have seen have been deeply, deeply targeted by these raids. And we are super, super honored to be joined here on the show by Teresa Romero, who is the president of the United Farm Workers, which is the oldest and largest labor union for farm workers in the United States. Teresa, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me. It is important that we magnify what is happening in the agricultural industry and how farm workers who put food on our table are the ones that are being targeted here in California.
No, absolutely. And maybe let's just start there. I mean, give us a sense of what workers in the fields. I mean, I think people have probably seen some of the videos of, ICE agents running into the fields, but give us a sense of what the day-to-day has been like in this crackdown for farm workers.
It has been very difficult. They are not criminals. They're people who work very hard to put food on our tables, like I just said, and they are family members. They are parents. They just want to live their life and continue working. And now they're terrified. I talk to farm workers who tell me that in his previous administration, the adults were the ones that would worry some about what could happen if they were detained by immigration. What happens now is they have to tell their children, who are U.S. citizens, what they need to do if mom and dad don't come home. So I've spoken with 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and they tell me, I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to school because I don't know if mommy and daddy are going to be here when I get back. So it is creating pain for the workers. It is creating anxiety for the children and for the entire communities, because just imagine, like you were saying earlier, they're afraid to go out. So that affects how they work. They cannot take their kids to the park. They cannot take the kids out to eat. They cannot go to school functions. So it's just damaging at every level.
I think a lot of Americans don't really understand the extremely important work that these farm workers are doing because, they don't see where food is growing. They don't see where food is being picked. I mean, in the U.S., you just kind of go to your local grocery store and it's just there. And you don't really think too much about how it got there, right? So I'm just curious, before we kind of get into some of the ways that the Trump administration is terrorizing these workers, if you can explain the importance and what work we're talking about here, because without it, a lot would collapse in the U.S.
Absolutely. These immigrant workers, according to the federal government, at least 40% are undocumented. The agricultural industry in this country would not exist. I have talked to some employers where they're telling me, especially smaller farms, they're telling me that if they take their workforce, they're going to go out of business. I want people to understand, and I hope people and consumers understand the human toil and suffering that this is creating. But if that's not something that gets to them, let me tell you what is going to happen. Right now, like you said, we go to the store, every type of food that we're looking for, we're going to find. There is going to be a time where we're going to go to the store. We're not going to have every type of food that we want, and it's going to be very expensive. And that's when people are going to say, this is not what I voted for, because they only react when it affects them directly. I want people to understand that it's a lot more than the price of food.
No, I think that's critically important. And I mean, it also goes to just the point that farm workers are already fighting so many different fights. I mean, heat, pesticides, housing, I mean, on medical care, I mean, on every level. And I mean, this is the work that you all do, day in and day out to organize farm workers. But I mean, it just feels like this is just such an extra, this sense of terror blanket being dropped on people who are already being, put in pretty difficult circumstances to make the food that we eat.
Farm workers, in the previous administration, Trump's administration, during the pandemic, he deemed them essential workers. And they were working every day, and some of them paid with their lives. And he didn't mind whether they were documented or not. They were essential. They needed to be in the fields. They needed to work. But right now, there's still the same workforce. And what I hear from the workers is he says that we're essential, but he treats us as if we were disposable.
Mm.
No human being should feel like that. They contribute so much to not only putting food on our tables, our economy. Like you said, here in California, there are areas where the temperatures can get to 115, 120 degrees. They are working under those circumstances. They work when there are fires. They're, bending over on their knees. It's just a lot that they sacrifice. And they're professionals. A lot of people say, it's just labor work. It is not. They're professionals. They know what to do. They work in different crops, and I can guarantee you that we could not do it. We could not do it. And they're not going to find the workforce here to do this work. And fruits and vegetables are going to be rotting in the fields.
I'm curious, what kind of solidarity, if any, are you seeing from other labor movements or organizations, and also from the general public?
Oh, tremendous, tremendous. There's organizations. In March, on Cesar Chavez's anniversary of his passing, we had a march in Delano, and several unions came together, and the important thing was, on the theme was with these hands, because what we're saying, construction workers, hotel workers, with those hands, they serve us. They make our lives easier, better, and the support that we had, not only from other labor organizations, from elected officials, from other nonprofits that care and work for immigrants, the community. It was just something that it has to continue. It has to continue. We could need to continue to bring awareness to what is happening to the people that serve us, to the people that, one of the couple of weeks ago, we had a rally in LA because David Huerta, a president of SEIU local here in California, was arrested. And just for being there, for asking questions, and they immediately just pushed him. He fell back. I mean, look what happened to Senator Alex Padilla. If that happens to the people who are prominent, just imagine what is happening to farm workers, to undocumented people. People say they're being detained. They're not being detained. They're being kidnapped. They don't have a search warrant. They don't have a name of a person that they're looking for because he or she has a criminal record. They don't have that. They're taking people that are working or people in the streets that are brown and deporting them.
No, I think that's such a good point, and on so many different levels. It reminds me, one, on the issue of them being professionals, you all have one of the greatest Twitter feeds showing how people actually really work. But one of the things I noticed yesterday is how, in some of the UFW contracts, maybe all of them, Juneteenth is a holiday for many of the workers, and workers expressing the importance of that. And it just reminds me seeing like the racial profiling on the streets, the racist criminalization of immigrants, that, this is like a social movement as much as a labor movement, because obviously this country wanted Black and brown people to come here and work for very little money and very poor conditions. And then now they want to crack down and say, oh, you all got to get out of here.
That's exactly what is happening. They want to, Trump run and campaign on deporting criminals. And the fact that he's going to places of work, to communities, to churches, to schools, these people are not criminals. Let me tell you what he can find the criminals. He can go to the prisons. Those people have been afforded their constitutional right of being charged, tried by a jury, found guilty, and sentenced. These people that are being kidnapped from work, from the streets, from schools, have not been afforded that constitutional right. We try to find out, when you see people in regular clothing with masks on, how do we know who these people are? How do we know that they're officers? It is very scary what is happening to our country. This is not who we are. And let me tell you something. What they're trying to do is intimidate us. And if we let them, they win and we lose. What they're trying to do is separate us. And if we let them, they win and we lose. What they're trying to do is distrust each other within our own communities. And if we let them, they win and we lose.
I'm curious if you can talk at all about the response in terms of, because when it comes to undocumented immigrants, they're a very vulnerable community because, oh, there goes my electricity, but it'll come back. When we talk about undocumented immigrants, they're a very vulnerable community because it's not like it's easy for somebody who does not have proper citizenship status to go protest in the street, especially in this political climate when even without protesting, people are being kidnapped off the streets. So I guess my question is, how are people able to organize and fight back? And I think this is where it's really important for those who are documented, for those who do have citizenship status, to make sure that they get involved, because this is one of those moments where you actually have the ability to do things that these people who are being targeted cannot.
In the union, we say, do the right thing when nobody's looking. When we have these communities that are good, hardworking people that are being terrorized, like I keep telling people, they're not being arrested, they're being kidnapped, and we need to step up and fight for them. I usually like farm workers to have their own voice and be the ones to speak up, but right now they can't. We would be putting them at risk. So all of us, all our communities, all of us who eat should be out there and supporting farm workers, supporting immigrant communities, and making sure that this changes, that this doesn't continue. I keep saying, if Trump is in charge, he could make that stop right now. But that's a big if, because he has surrounded himself with people that are anti-immigrant, that are very racist, and they are the ones that are making the decisions. So if he's in charge, we can stop this right now.
Well, Teresa, I want to ask you before we let you go, if there are ways that people can support the work that you all are doing in the United Farm Workers.
Absolutely. We are an organization, a union that tries to get the funds. We're trying to create a group of attorneys that would be ready to help farm workers who are being detained. And donations are always welcome, because that's exactly what we need right now to be able to have the capacity to protect people. They can go to ufw.org and they could make a donation there.
Mm-hmm. Well, we really appreciate it. We really appreciate you giving us some of your time. Teresa Romero, President of the United Farm Workers, thanks so much for being with us here on the show.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Well, I just want to say, if you like your strawberries, if you like your tomatoes, if you like your meat, if you like basically anything that you can get at a grocery store that is a whole food, and maybe even other foods as well, you need to care about this. Also because people are being impacted in a disgusting terroristic way. But it really it's amazing to me that these people in charge, Eugene, they must understand where they're getting their food from. I don't get it. I don't get it, but we need to understand, because that will literally disappear if this continues.
Absolutely. Yeah, probably divided opinion. Also, the fact that, the more they can terrorize people and force them into the shadows, the more they can exploit them. And, I hope this is an opportunity for people to really look into what's going on with farm workers. Who have been terrorized, by the way, by immigration, pretty much since time immemorial here in the United States. But, the housing crisis that's happening there, the heat, the pesticides. And if you look, I encourage people to go to the Farm Workers X account. They're probably on Instagram too. I'm not on Instagram, but they put out these videos of people in the field.
Yeah.
These people should be making $100 an hour. It's unbelievable, actually, that they aren't.
They're certainly working significantly harder. Certainly working significantly harder.
And it's also one of those jobs that, you have a lower, you don't have as long of a working life, because it's the injuries that you get, your back, your knees, all these other things. So, you can't work until 60, 70 years old. Not that anyone really should have to be working, that, but it really is a shame. So yeah, hopefully folks can do what they can to support everyone. But, I think this hopefully can be an inflection point for us, vis-a-vis farm workers and vis-a-vis that struggle overall and what we really need to do. But as you said, Rania, at the outset, there's so many things going on. Like the nothing ever happens. People are just in shambles. But we are on the precipice. Wow, I'm about to say this and it just feels wild to say this. We're on the precipice of an even broader war in West Asia, Middle Eastern region, potentially could even, go to a level we would not like to see it in terms of the type of weapons that are being used. So a lot at stake, a lot on the table, and a big debate happening here in the United States about, whether or not the U.S. should become more deeply involved, more involved, how we should deal with Iran, how we should deal with Israel, and many different related issues. And we are very, very honored to help us sort through all of this, to be joined by Eli Clifton, who is a senior advisor at the Quincy Institute. Eli, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, great to have you here. And I guess I'll just start with, now Trump has said yesterday that he's going to decide within 2 weeks whether or not he's going to bomb Iran. I mean, where are you seeing the debate here in Washington? I mean, it seems that there's some sort of divided opinion, both within the Trump administration and obviously within the population itself.
Well, I think we should start with the population as a whole. There was a great YouGov Economist poll that came out a few days ago, which really, actually, I think surprised a lot of us, that it showed that by a significant majority across various groups, Americans are opposed to entering into a war against Iran. Now, within the Republican Party, there is also a very meaningful split going on within the MAGA movement. And I think that's probably where we should be paying most of our attention, because on one side, you have people who are sort of more the traditional hawks in the party, those who have generally been able to dictate what the foreign policy of the Republican Party, and in many cases, the Democratic Party as well, has been. And certainly within the administration, that will be represented by people like Marco Rubio. But on the other side, you seem to have folks who are more associated in some respects with the MAGA movement, such as Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson, who are pretty strongly coming out against the idea that the United States should get involved in this war, and certainly that we shouldn't be getting involved under the terms that we are, where it appears that the Trump administration's nuclear diplomacy with Iran was, in some respects, it appears to have been cut short, or at least boxed in by the Israeli decision to launch a strike that it turns out they were unsuccessful in killing the lead Iranian negotiator, but it certainly appeared that that was the intent of of certainly the first efforts of this strike that they undertook. So I think that there's a number of interesting dynamics at play there. But of course, all of it comes back to Trump himself, who appears to be quite conflicted. 2 weeks happens to be a popular, for whatever reasons, a popular number for him in terms of when and how he will make a decision. One concern I do have is that he is setting yet another deadline. And the 60-day deadline, I think, was probably pretty effectively used by the Israelis to box in his freedom of movement, his own freedom of making an independent decision. Negotiations were scheduled to be continuing past that 60-day threshold, and the Israelis took their own action that seemed to undermine it. One thing that certainly I'm acutely aware of is I was in Tehran about a month ago now. I actually got to speak with a number of foreign ministry officials, including members of the nuclear negotiating team. They certainly had their own questions about whether or not the Trump administration was being sincere in the negotiations. I believe the Trump administration was. I don't see what they gained by playing for time, the way some people are suggesting in sort of a more conspiratorial way, that this was to soften up the Iranians for these strikes. I mean, Tehran doesn't apparently have their own air defenses. So I don't quite see what softening up occurred. But I think one thing I took away from those conversations is that the Iranians, for the most part, seem to be pretty serious about moving forward. And they indicated that, and this was confirmed by other news reports, that there actually was progress in the negotiations between their negotiating team and Steve Witkoff, who was leading the American negotiations. They did appear to be hung up around issues around zero enrichment. But even on that matter, there seemed to be areas of potential creative compromise and problem solving. For instance, the nuclear consortium idea of having uranium enrichment being done in the region in a consortium with other Gulf states at a facility where it will be under surveillance, under IAEA watchdogs. Where that facility could be, that could have been potentially, and I think that door may be closed now, but I think that could have posed an opportunity for some creative compromise. What if that facility was inside Iranian territory somewhere? That may have been a face-saving way out for the Iranians on the no zero enrichment promise, but giving the Americans and the Europeans safeguards in place, as well as a buy-in from other regional countries to keep enrichment at or under the 3.67% number that is so important. So I think there was a lot of opportunity. I think much of it was squandered. And now we're left with, Trump is sort of blowing in the wind is the impression one gets. Unfortunately, it seems as if Tulsi Gabbard, from his director of national intelligence, has been sidelined from a lot of the discussions and negotiations. Her last statements about the U.S. intelligence community's assessment of Iran's nuclear program was that they had not yet made the decision whether to pursue a nuclear weapon. Now that goes against a lot of what we're being told, largely by the Israelis, that somehow a decision had been made. That is not the position of the U.S. intelligence community. Finally, and I know that I'm covering a lot here, but finally, I would say that one other interesting thing to look at is that the Democrats can't seem to decide where they want to fall on this. And in fairness, there are some Democrats out there taking really good positions, reaching across the aisle, people like Ro Khanna, people like Bernie Sanders, who are out there saying, we don't want this war, and we certainly don't want Congress to be cut out of giving approval for a war, as has been the custom now for quite a period of time. But at the same time, you see a lot of, see the Lincoln Project kind of taunting Trump for being indecisive. And I think that sentiment is reflected across a lot of sort of Democratic Party politicians as well as activists to see what's sort of the quickest political points they can score against him, rather than actually take the mantle here of what's a populist sentiment of that we don't want this war. That same populist sentiment that ultimately the Democrats took up against George W. Bush a little bit too late, but they did so. And in many respects, they seem to be really missing an opportunity there.
It really is incredible to watch, especially when you see the polling showing almost 70% of Americans do not support the U.S. joining it to bomb Iran with the Israelis. I think it's really interesting, though, this the schism we're seeing inside, I don't know if we want to call it like inside his base, where you've got the sort of like, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon side of things, and I think you could put Tulsi into that box. And then you've got these neocon war hawk types that Trump spent so much time mocking. I mean, I still remember 2016 watching Trump rise in the Republican primary. And one of the reasons he rose the way he did was he was mocking Jeb Bush on the debate stage about his family, his entire family, and, George Bush's regime change war in Iraq. Meanwhile, so many of the elements that were there that led us to the war in Iraq, I'm seeing play out now, especially the politicization of intelligence. It seems like the Trump administration spokespeople now are literally going with the Israeli intelligence about Iran's 15 days away from a bomb, when their own intelligence agencies, as you mentioned, Tulsi Gabbard, director of national intelligence, just a few months ago, saying that Iran is not close to having a bomb or whatever. So anyways, I'm just curious about if you could elaborate a bit on the, significance of the fact that Trump's base seems split over this, which might be leading to some of his hesitation. I'm speculating there. And also the sort of element of who's inside his administration, like who's got this guy's ear, who are the players here. I know Tulsi Gabbard is being sidelined, but is everybody in his cabinet 100% for this?
Well, I have no reason to believe that everyone in his cabinet is 100% for this. I would go back to the politicization of intelligence. I actually think that's kind of an odd little footnote in what's going on here, comparing it to the lead up to the Iraq War. In a sense, the intelligence is not being politicized this time the way it was back in 2002, 2003, because they have not gotten the U.S. intelligence estimate on, at least the public U.S. intelligence estimate on Iran's nuclear program to change. It is still what it was back in March, by all accounts. But with the lead up to the invasion of Iraq, there was an effort to manufacture, to cherry pick intelligence, to certainly to politicize it, to fabricate, is how many of us would see it, the intelligence to justify the invasion. That isn't even happening here. The only place that one can even turn in order to get intelligence estimates that somehow contradict what Tulsi Gabbard and the U.S. intelligence community have said is to turn to Israel or to other foreign sources. So in that regard, it's rather odd that we have not actually seen anything coming out of the administration or out of the intelligence community to justify what's going on. Now, in terms of who are the voices acting on Donald Trump, I think you picked up an interesting period of time there, which Donald Trump in the 2016 Republican primaries. Because the Donald Trump who ran in those primaries was not the Donald Trump who ultimately ran in the general election or who had a first term of president and now has his second term. And I say that because the things he said as a primary candidate, that it turned out, we were told he was grabbing the third rail of American foreign policy. He was challenging all of these regime change wars. He was challenging what the U.S.-Israel relationship was. He was challenging whether the Iran nuclear deal even was such a big mistake. People quickly are forgetting the things he said then because he stopped saying most of those things. But I think you picked up on one of them. He said the Iraq war was a mistake. He also said that the U.S. needed to be a more neutral party between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And on the debate stage, when pretty much every other Republican candidate was promising to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal and saying it was such a big mistake, Donald Trump said that his main concern with it is that Iran was buying more Airbus parts than Boeing parts. Now, there was a moment that he changed. And I think that moment was after he clinched the nomination and after he had to raise realistically around $1 billion to run in the general election, because that's what it costs to run a nationwide presidential campaign. And at that point, he needed to get the support of the Adelson family, Sheldon and Miriam Adelson, who are very outspoken. I don't think they do anything. I don't think they are deceitful in any way, shape, or form. They say what their concerns are, and that they very much would like to have U.S. military action against Iran. Sheldon Adelson, who's now deceased, he had proposed that the United States should actually use a nuclear weapon against Iran. And they're very clear about their very, very, very pro-Israel sentiments. Miriam Adelson herself is a U.S.-Israeli dual national. Now, Trump changes the moment he secures the nomination, and a few weeks later he has to secure the support of the Adelson family, which he does. And in turn, he basically stops talking like this about. Certainly about Iran, certainly about Israel. And over the course of his first term, he delivers on a host of things that the Adelson family wanted. He recognizes the Golan Heights as part of Israel. He abrogates from the Iran nuclear deal. He moves the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He sells, to make sure it's not easy to move the embassy back, he actually sells the ambassador's house to the Adelson family. And all of these steps along the way, and ending in the final weeks of his term in that December, right before January 6th, he, in something that did not get much media attention, he lifted the parole restrictions on an Israeli spy, Jonathan Pollard, that the intelligence community had been adamant should not have his parole restrictions and his ability to travel given back to him. And the Adelson family flies him out of Newark Airport on their personal private jet back to Tel Aviv, where he is greeted by Benjamin Netanyahu. So as one of the final acts of president, Donald Trump does a final favor for the Adelson family and for their other pro-Israel supporters. So I think when we talk about, Donald Trump understands populism. He understands that people don't want these wars. And I'm sure he understands that going into another Middle East war, the kinds that he had promised people that we wouldn't enter into again, that's good politics. But he's very much been jammed now, and he's in a hard spot, partially because I think he listened to people like the Adelson family and the politicians that they wanted to put around him, like John Bolton in his first term. And Benjamin Netanyahu also embarrassed Trump by undermining his nuclear diplomacy. And now Trump has to either say that he was played by Netanyahu, or he has to say, actually, I understood what was going on here, and I was actually in charge the whole time. So he's caught between a bad political choice that could be disastrous with going into a war with Iraq, or breaking from that and acknowledging that he's been manipulated.
You said Iraq, you meant Iran.
I'm sorry, in Iran.
Isn't that hilarious?
Yeah,
no, but I mean, you know what? It's like at the end of the day, you see that Ted Cruz clip, and it's clear that these people really don't even know the difference. I mean,
absolutely.
It's just completely insane. Sorry, Eugene, I may have cut you off there.
No, you did not cut me off. And I think it's a great point. And I guess it speaks to maybe the question I want to ask, which is just even the idea that somehow negotiations are a sign of weakness. That, like, you know, and obviously, of course, everyone always is bandying about appeasement. I don't think they could tell you one thing about the year 1938. But nonetheless, it's sort of like if anyone is trying to negotiate, they must be weak, and that like countries should just be constantly bombing and attacking and going to war with one another to, you know, resolve their differences as opposed to trying to talk them through. And it feels like that is such a through line from Iraq to Libya to just every, you know, conflict we can think of in recent memory.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, you know, to put aside sort of a, you know, a moral judgment about that, I think we've tested it out. You know, we've spent, you know, the past couple decades doing exactly that, you know, trying to use American military might to reshape the region in ways that we believe will better serve our interest, make us safer, make our partners in the region safer. And I would challenge anybody to say that objectively that has proven to be successful. And I think that that polling that we keep talking about, I think reflects that at some level. I'm not saying like at that level of nuance, but I think people understand that these wars are expensive. A lot of people die, both in the region as well as Americans. And we're not convinced, clearly, that they're worthwhile or making us demonstrably safer. And I think it takes that experience of Iraq and Afghanistan and the interventions in Libya and the interventions in Syria for the American public to be coming to that conclusion. Again, we gave this a chance. It got a really long opportunity to play out, to see if we can remake the region in ways that are beneficial to us. And I think it's very hard to make a compelling argument sitting here in 2025 that those wars worked out the ways that many people had hoped that they would.
I actually want to challenge that. Not to say that I think that reshaping the region's great. It's absolutely not. But if I'm a Lindsey Graham, or if I'm a Ted Cruz, and I've watched the last 20 months of genocide in Gaza, right, where Israel can get away with whatever it wants, and the U.S. is going to keep supporting it, no matter which administration is, no matter which party's in charge. There's no consequences, at least not yet. Maybe there will be at some point in the future, but not yet internationally, to what Israel's doing in Gaza. Israel has weakened Hamas in Gaza because it's been carrying out a genocide for 20 months, and any group in a space that's being treated the way Gaza is being treated would absolutely be weakened. It managed to weaken Hezbollah after a devastating war in Lebanon, which got even worse after the overthrow of the Assad regime, which was a government that was in alliance with Hezbollah and Iran. And that's a place where the U.S. spent over a decade, and a lot of other countries spent over a decade trying to weaken that government through a proxy war, through sanctions, chipping away. And you know what? In retrospect, it ultimately worked, because now somebody else is in charge of Syria who is begging to normalize with Israel and completely disassociate from this axis of resistance. And so now, you know, all of these different spaces that used to be seen as sources of anti-American, anti-imperialist resistance to Israeli hegemony across the region have been weakened. So again, I'm going to go back to, if I'm Ted Cruz, if I'm Lindsey Graham, if I'm Benjamin Netanyahu, now it looks like an opportunity, because now all these places that, you know, one of the reasons that there wasn't an attempt to go to war with Iran in the past was because, oh, well, look what Hezbollah might do to Israel. But Hezbollah is in a different position now, and Lebanon is different domestically. Because of a devastating war. Gaza is different because of a devastating war. So I can kind of see why these people are kind of like going in for the kill as they see it. I think it's very stupid. And I think ultimately, like, they're not going to get the results they want. But it sort of makes sense if you're a neocon, I guess, is where I'm going with that.
I think you're making a really good point there, which is and something that I've wanted to sort of call more attention to, which is that the overstatement of the influence and strength of the so-called axis of resistance is something that was built up, frankly, by people on both sides. The Iranians, people who were more sympathetic to the Iranians, built up this mythology, and so did the neoconservatives, so did the hawks. And I think in many ways they were, not intentionally, but working sort of, working together in this and building up this mythology because it actually played to both of their interests. And what we've seen is obviously that the calculation about the level of influence and the strength of, for instance, Hezbollah was severely overstated by pretty much all these reputable analysts simply got that wrong. But including Lindsey Graham, incidentally. I think they all played up the notion that Hezbollah was this massive force. And again, I know a lot of folks on the left as well who are anti-war who had that sentiment as well, that this is, that the Iranians really had this amazing force in Hezbollah. Definitely, Hezbollah, much like the Iranian regime now, is antiquated. Its rigidity and the ways it's fracturing and weak are now becoming very, very clear. I am not convinced, however, and I think if our lesson from making that mistake is to say that we are now ready to take on a regime change operation in a country of 90 million, I think that is probably a severe misjudgment. Again, looking back at Iraq, looking back at Afghanistan, those types of wars don't work. They simply don't. And I mean, I don't think the lessons of the past few years really could justify that. Now, I understand the sentiment of now we need to go in for the kill, but you can only press so far, and it's one thing to decapitate and severely weaken in the most sort of exaggerated sense this Iranian proxy force, which is probably testing the limits of how one could characterize Hezbollah. That's not even a nation state or a government or have defined territory. It's a whole other matter to say that you're going to replace the government in Iran, or that the government that somehow pops up to replace the existing one is going to be more favorable to American interests or to Israeli ones. And that's the roll of the dice I think that they are recklessly leaning towards taking.
I also think it's a huge miscalculation to think that, yes, like in Lebanon, the majority of the country, might have different opinions than Hezbollah, but they have a very loyal base that is still willing to fight. And I mean, in Iran, there's, whether the government is so popular among everybody is a different question, but they have a very loyal base that will be even more willing to fight. And also, you'd be unifying a country when you're bombing it, because everyone's going to feel that sort of level of nationalism and patriotism when all of their countrymen are under attack.
But already we are seeing the same types of talking points, the same type of arguments that were used with Iraq, which is that, people are celebrating because we are bombing them. It really is amazing that here we are now in 2025, still having people make the serious suggestion that hearts and minds get won by bombing people. As you pointed out.
I apologize, Eli. We got to cut because we want to try to get someone from Tehran right now so we can see the situation on the ground. Eli Clifton with the Quincy Institute, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, for time's sake, Rania, for our guest who I know has been waiting, I just want to go right to it because we are very honored to have with us Professor Mohammad Marandi from the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you here. And I'll ask you this. I mean, some of us have seen, the images of large protests, rallies happening all across Iran in conjunction with Friday prayers today. I mean, talk about the Iranian people and where they are and how people are feeling there on the ground in the midst of these assaults.
Well, this is the major problem that the United States has. It has a lot of so-called Iran experts. It brings in Iranians or former Iranians from different agencies or different universities, and these people basically say what they want to hear. And the narrative in the United States is that the regime, as they like to call it, is collapsing, it's weak, it's hated, it's unpopular, and that all we have to do is give it a bit of a push and kill some people and bomb some places and murder some children, and they will fall apart. And the exact opposite happened, as we knew would happen, because, first of all, the Islamic Republic of Iran has always had strong popular support among its public. That does not mean that the public supports government policies or that it's happy with the economy. They're there are 90 million people with 90 million different views. But overwhelmingly, they believe that the Constitution is a good Constitution, and they believe that the government is legitimate. So, under ordinary circumstances, these narratives that are created in Washington won't work. But when they carry out an assault on a nation and they start helping a genocidal regime that's carrying out a genocide in Gaza, when they help them attack ordinary Iranians and we see dead kids on the streets of Tehran, that is going to create a unity among ordinary Iranians that we have not seen for decades. And that, I think, was expected. But Washington, since it's always blinded to the truth and is always believing in its own fantasies, it can't see that. And even now, it can't see that. I'm sure that all these protests that you're seeing across the country today in Iran, at a time when the Israeli regime is carrying out strikes on civilian targets, they will not take that into consideration. They'll say, oh, these are just official government regime protests and that sort of nonsense. And so they'll continue to walk blind and miscalculate and lead the United States towards a very dangerous situation. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Libya. Iran is not Syria. Iran is not Vietnam. The damage that Iran and its allies can do to the United States could bring down the US economy. And you should look to Iraq today and this protest that we've seen in Iraq, where Muqtada Sadr on the one hand, Ayatollah Sistani on the other, and everyone in between is outraged at the United States. And what could happen in Iraq could be of major consequences to the United States if it indeed chooses to act in a directly aggressive manner against the Iranian people. And of course, the Iranian armed forces will respond very swiftly. Their capabilities in the Persian Gulf are enormous. Iran has many underground bases, and the ability for Iran to strike the Americans and those Arab family regimes in the Persian Gulf, which are very vulnerable and weak, and which export a lot of oil and gas. Iran's ability to hit them hard is visible to all, and that would lead to a crisis, an economic crisis, that I think would make 1929 and the 1930s look somewhat benign.
Mohammad Marandi, you are very well known for putting the anchors of various news programs in their place, from Sky News to Piers Morgan. And I think everybody really does appreciate those segments that you do, sometimes, narrating their own propaganda back to them. But, something very much more serious happened the other day, because you were doing an interview, you were filming an interview. I don't know, you can clarify exactly what happened. I saw what you were saying on Twitter. You were either in the building or next to the building that the Israelis hit of the Iranian media station that we all saw happen live on air. And then you and Piers Morgan got into a Twitter fight about it later. And I mean, he was being so disgusting towards you, as he usually is. But can you tell us what happened there?
Well, I was in the press TV building, which is a part of Iranian national radio and TV, but it's outside of the main campus or complex. And I was preparing to do the interview because they've slowed the internet. And so I have to go to government buildings or places where they have better internet. And even there, it's not, in these places, it's not very good. But I went to the Press TV building to do the interview. And at that time, while I was waiting, they struck the main building of the Iranian radio and television. And they murdered journalists and three women broadcasters, one for radio and two for television, one for a children's program. They were there. They were doing their work as they were attacked. And one of them, we saw the explosion take place behind her. And of course, in the West, it had no visibility. No, you would think that these three women would be considered as heroes in the West. women who stood steadfast under fire. But no, since they're Iranians, since they're, non-white, since they're Asian, since they're Muslims, since they're linked to the Iranian television, they are worthless to Western journalists and to human rights organizations. So when this happened, and I think you're showing the footage of the strike, if I'm not mistaken, on that building. When this happened, I was told that to leave the building of Press TV, and that the building was being evacuated. And I was waiting for my to go into the to be put into connected to the studio and to begin my conversation, but I was delayed, and I told them that I have to
And sorry,
go.
just to clarify, this is a Piers Morgan show. Just to clarify.
Yes, Piers Morgan's team delayed me. They kept me in the backstage. I think that's what you call it. So they saw me arguing with the guard. I was pleading with him. A couple of times I raised my voice. And then ultimately the guard said, "I'm not leaving till you leave." And I felt very uncomfortable about that. So I yelled at him. And so he went downstairs. He said, "I'll go downstairs and wait for you." So I waited and waited. And then, I've also been asked to get rid of my cell phone by Iranian security people. And they said that we hear that you're on media and that may cause you trouble. So it's best for you not to get rid of your phone. I said, well, if I do that, I can't do media. And so I said, I can't. And they just left. But in any case, so I was under those circumstances. And so when I finally got to speak, Piers Morgan started insulting Iran, demonizing Iran, the sort of demonization that you hear when Western media wants to prepare the ground for murder and slaughter. You demonize, you call them evil, so that an evil regime like the Israeli regime, the genocidal regime that's carrying out this Holocaust in Gaza, could be somehow rebranded as the good guy. And so they could kill Iranians because the Iranians are evil. And that's basically what he and other people in the media were doing. So he had basically a piece of paper out in front of him, and he had this list of horrible things about Iran, which were all false. I'd once invited him to Iran, and he declined, and then he insulted me, implying that I would take him hostage or something. He's a child, but he's dishonest.
Wow.
And I think that I recently a host of journalists have visited Iran, including Max Blumenthal, George Galloway, and many others. And they spent quite a bit of time in Iran. I think Max spent and his wife, Anya Parampil, they spent 2 weeks in Iran traveling the country. And they know that Iran is not at all similar to what the United States presents it as and to what Western media presents it to be. But this demonization is intentional. It is something that mainstream media is doing to prepare the grounds for more death and destruction. And that's why I consider Piers Morgan and almost all legacy media journalists to be complicit in genocide, because they have, by justifying the Israeli regime for 21 months, they have been a part of this genocide. They have been a part of this Holocaust. And what they've done in the past is unforgivable. And what they're attempting to do now is unforgivable as well.
Well, Professor, I want to ask you a question, because when you look at the context of what's happening, and certainly what Americans are hearing, right, is that Iran is like desperately trying to develop this nuclear weapon to attack America, and there has to be some deterrence. Now, of course, there's very little evidence of that, and it just seems to me, when you look at that very little evidence, that this really isn't about nuclear weapons. It's about whether or not Iran is going to be allowed to have its own government, its own policies, stand on its own 2 feet, and become a powerful country in the region. It's obviously a very developed country, big science and technology, and it feels like that is so much of why Iran is being targeted, and we're just being told about this nuclear threat as a cover for something else, a different type of approach.
Absolutely. Not that there's little evidence. There's absolutely no evidence. And this is all about Iran's independence and Iran's support for the Palestinian people. That's it. Whether it's, I don't know, animal rights or human rights or terrorism or the nuclear program or global warming or whatever they want to throw at Iran, children's rights, whatever they want to throw at Iran, that's all the cover story. The real story is Iran's independence, Iran's sovereignty. Iran is not in the Western camp. Iran is completely supports the aspirations of the Palestinian people. Iran is opposed to ethno-supremacism and apartheid, and it calls for the full dismantling of ethno-supremacism and the notion of a chosen people or a master race or a superior people in the land of Palestine as well as anywhere else. When the revolution happened in Iran, the former regime was sending 90% of South Africa's oil. They were 90% of apartheid now South Africans' oil was coming from Iran. And the revolutionaries cut that off immediately. And then they cut off ties with the South African regime. And then they began funding the ANC, the military wing of the ANC, and other resistance organizations. And they did the same in Palestine. They cut off ties with the Israeli regime. They stopped investing in the Israeli armaments, and they shut their embassy and they opened a Palestinian embassy. So for the United States, that is completely unacceptable. And so regime change, or the idea of regime change in Iran has been what the United States and its allies have been pursuing for decades. With regards to the nuclear program, as Tulsi Gabbard herself admitted just a while back, that there's no evidence that the Iranians are, the U.S. intelligence believes that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon. And then Trump says, I don't care what she says. And it shows that this is all political. Even the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, he said twice in the last week that there's no evidence that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon, even though he is in the pocket, effectively, of the Americans. If you look back to WikiLeaks, the previous head, Amano, who's Japanese, when he wanted to become the head of the organization, he went and told the Americans, look, I will do whatever you say. I'm in your camp. Just vote for me. And that's how he got elected. In the board of governors at the IAEA, I checked on DeepSeek, 17 of the 35 are European and North American. Then there are 2, Korea, South Korea, of course, and Japan. That makes it 19. And then the chainsaw guy from Argentina, 20. That's their votes against Iran. The rest of the members of the board, which constitute the global South, they voted either against it or they didn't vote for it. And that means effectively 7 billion of 8 billion people. India didn't vote for it. China voted against it. Russia voted against it. Brazil, and so on and so forth. So for those who use the argument, they know this is a false argument about the board of directors. The board of directors is a political body, but the experts that are used in the IAEA, they've never discovered any evidence that Iran has been pursuing a nuclear weapon. And Iran has not been pursuing a nuclear weapon, not today, not yesterday, and not before 2003. So this is all an excuse to help Israel, because the Israeli regime has launched a war against Iran, and it is failing. If it wasn't failing, and if it was really doing well in accordance with the propaganda that we're seeing from the West, the United States and Trump wouldn't be moving towards aggression against Iran. They would be sitting back and enjoying themselves as the Israelis slaughter Iranians, as Western elites usually do. But now Trump is making very dangerous steps. And I say this as a warning to all your listeners and your viewers. If the United States attacks Iran, the global economy will go downhill immediately, and the global economy will collapse. This will be far worse than the 1930s. Iran will not just, all these Arab family dictatorships these tiny dictatorships on this other side of the Persian Gulf, they are glass palaces, and U.S. bases exist in every single one of them. And an American attack would mean that they are complicit. And on the other hand, look at what's happening in Iraq today. Look at the people who've come to the streets in Iraq. They are completely opposed to the United States and outraged at what the United States is doing and how the United States and the Israeli regime are threatening Iranian leaders. So while the United States and the Europeans are looking more like they live in the Wild West, they don't recognize that we're not living in the 1990s anymore. This is a new era, and the United States is declining fast. The United States will not win a war against Iran, and Iran will make sure that the United States fails. Now, those American exceptionalists can continue living in their bubble thinking that they'll win. They couldn't win against Yemen. They don't have a chance against Iran. So the smart thing to do is for the United States to back off and to yank hard on Netanyahu's leash and to accept Iran's rights. I heard your previous guest speak about a consortium. Under no circumstances has Iran said, will Iran accept a consortium to replace its enrichment program? That's off the table. That's never been on the table. But Iran is willing to have a deal with the United States if the United States is sincerely worried about Iran's peaceful nuclear program. If they're sincere, which they're not, but if they're sincere and they want to solve the problem, it can be solved. This has been negotiated so many times over the years that both sides know exactly how to resolve the situation. But if Trump wants war because the Zionists and the neocons want it, then I think with the divide that we see in the United States, things will go downhill for him very fast. And I don't believe that he will finish his term in office. I think he'll be ousted.
Well, Professor Marandi, it stands to be seen. We're all waiting for what the decision of Donald Trump is, whether he wants to escalate or not. And it's hard to know because, it seems as though there's been this pattern, right, where he dispatches Steve Witkoff, whether it's with Gaza or now the same thing happened with the Iran negotiations, where everything's being negotiated, everything seems kind of to be going in a decent direction, and then it all just falls apart. It's like it was meaningless. So I'm curious, you mentioned that any sort of deal with the U.S., you kept saying if they're sincere, but you don't think they're sincere. I mean, there just seems to be a demonstrated pattern of basically tricking and lying.
Oh, yes. I mean, it's not just Trump. If you recall, under Biden, when we had the negotiations over a ceasefire in Gaza, Hamas accepted the deal, and the U.S. Secretary of State kept saying Hamas doesn't accept the deal and the Israelis do, whereas it was the exact opposite. Then when Witkoff came, they did the same thing. Witkoff was when Hamas accepted the deal and Netanyahu didn't. They kept blaming Hamas. But ultimately, at the beginning of Trump's presidency, the night before when the deal was struck, what did we see happen literally a couple of weeks later? Trump himself pulled out of the deal. He destroyed the deal and said that Palestinians must leave Gaza. We see the same thing in the trade war, where one day Trump takes one position and then he says this is it, and then he backs down. We've seen this shift take place in Ukraine, where he was supposed to end the war on day one, and we thought that Kellogg was a joke, and now it seems like Kellogg is what he's saying is now official government position. So Trump has no credibility. And then on the night of the Israeli attack on Iran, he says, I'm against war, and the next day he's gloating about it, and he tells us basically that he's behind it. How can anyone negotiate with such a person? And then someone who threatens leaders, someone who tells people, for example, it's like me saying the people of New York must leave New York tonight. That's terrorism. But and then you don't see American elites criticizing or attacking Trump for these criminal acts. Why? Because these elites, when it comes to these issues, they're all on the same page. When it comes to other issues, they want him removed or they despise him. But when it's killing brown people or killing people who are opposed to genocide and a Holocaust, they're all in it together. If you recall, in 2016, when Trump was elected, they called him a Russian stooge. But as soon as he started firing off missiles at poor Syria, everyone said he's become the president. That is how corrupt Washington is. And that is the problem that not only the government has, but all of these think tanks and all of these this legacy media, this bubble that exists. They, in my opinion, they cannot be redeemed. You cannot redeem these people. And so the only way forward is for them to recognize that they cannot attack Iran and get away with it. And they will pay a very, very heavy price. And I think that when the global economy goes south, when it collapses, people in the United States will start seeking out those people who brought about this situation for the American people.
Mm-hmm. Professor Mohammad Marandi, we really, really appreciate you giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Rania? I do hope he does stay safe, because the Israelis are just like attacking civilians across Iran. And the Iranians, I mean, every day I wake up, I don't know, I'm in Lebanon, Eugene, so at times I've been able to see the Iranian missiles heading towards Israel. I mean, this is the first time the Israelis have had to deal with consequences for their actions, because they have this 3-layered air defense system, right, that the U.S. Basically like pays for. Iron Dome is part of it. There's also the Arrow defense system,
the Arrow and
longer range missiles. Yeah. And so, but that system has been overwhelmed and they're running out of interceptors. So it's interesting, because it's like now all the articles are like, who will run out first? Iran, its ballistic missiles, or Israel, its interceptors. And so some people are speculating that Netanyahu knew they were running out of interceptors. So part of doing this when he did it was because then the U.S. will have to jump in and save Israel. We'll see how things play out. No one really knows what Trump is going to do. And Trump absolutely loves that. He just loves that the entire world is waiting for him to make a decision, because he's an egomaniacal person. But all that's to say, I mean, it could also be a bluff in the sense that, one, he could be lying about this 2-week deadline, and he might, join in on bombing Iran this weekend. Or, he might actually be looking for an off-ramp. Again, nobody knows, but it's a really, really scary moment, because, I didn't think we'd see this happen, honestly, because it's just so insane, Eugene. But after 20 months of genocide, I think we see the outcome of every single international norm, not even just from Gaza, from the last 25 years, but Gaza really, ramped it up on steroids. But every single international norm just bulldozed through by the U.S. and Israel, to the point where none of it matters anymore. And now we're on the precipice of yet another explosive catastrophe.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I think, Trump, he's not very original, as we maybe have seen, and just sort of copying Nixon's madman theory, from the Vietnam War, which is to create the perception that he would drop a nuclear bomb on Vietnam in order to get them to capitulate in the context of quote unquote negotiations. And to me, that I think is maybe the most notable thing about what Trump is doing here, or what he's revealing about himself, because obviously, in the campaign, in both of his campaigns, he made a big deal out of wanting to have deals and peace and this, that, and the third, and we're against the regime change wars and this. But really for Trump, the idea of a deal is just capitulation. I mean, we can see Iran, we can see China, we can see all these other countries, whether it be war itself, sanctions, tariffs. The idea of what the deal is going to be is you must capitulate to the terms that the United States puts on the table, and if not, we will just attack you. So he's just as much of a warmonger as anyone else, and he's trying to, I think, really use his own sort of leverage of will he or won't he? Who knows what he's going to do? America can do this, that, and the third. There's more deadly weapons coming to Israel. All these other things to try to see if he can force Iran to capitulate in the context of, the potential destruction. But, and something that was maybe less intense, which was just the tariff war with China, you see that he did retreat, even when he tried to come out with all this bluster. And the reason he retreated, and it's important for people to know this, is he said he watched Jamie Dimon on TV, and then he had a personal conversation with Tim Cook from Apple. There were other people calling him. So as much as, people think Trump is his own person. Trump himself is controlled by the ruling class and the billionaires. And when they step in sort of forcefully and say, do not do things, you can see that he turns around and does U-turns on multiple different issues. And so I think the question that was raised by Professor Marandi is the key question in terms of what Trump will do, is what is the perception of the richest people in the United States on what the potential impact of this could be? Do they not care? Do they think it won't be that big of a deal? Do they believe in a limited strike? Or is there a deep fear that if given sort of no other option, Iran may close the Straits of Hormuz, may attack, not just U.S. bases, but the oil and gas infrastructure in the Gulf states, like which would, bring down the economy if all of a sudden, like all oil and gas just stops flowing from West Asia? That's a big problem. Will they perceive these things and start to put more pressure on Trump to make a change? And then, of course, he's got his own internal political calculation. So there's a lot of questions, I think, in terms of people in the United States mobilizing and showing that 60% or 70% or whatever it is of people who are against it are real to, increase, I think, different points of pressure for peace in order to help influence this conversation. But I think it's going to be a delicate, close run thing here because there are so many warmongers in the broader U.S. ruling class who hate Iran. And I'll just stop here and let you. It goes all the way back to when you think about how the Israelis sold themselves to the British originally. And they said, we're going to protect you against these hordes from Asia. We're going to be the Western enforcer in this part of the world. And for a lot of these people, even if they know it's going to be problematic in Europe, in the UK, I guess part of Europe, the United States, Canada, whatever, they see countries like Iran that they can shoot satellites into space. They have advanced science and technology. They got a lot of people. And, Iran, China, like they look at all these countries and it's like they are scared of losing their own sort of racist, white supremacist imperial hegemony and are willing to risk great things. And I think some of them willing to risk World War III to prevent that from happening. It's like a psychosis. But just like the Confederacy, no one was saying let's end slavery, and they said let's go to war because we're that crazy. And I think a lot of ruling class people are. So it's a very dangerous situation.
No, I agree. And again, no one knows how it's going to play out. I mean, everybody's guessing, everybody's putting their money down, everybody's giving probabilities, but at the end of the day, nobody knows. And I am concerned at the sense that, like, when you say it's, oh, where's the ruling class on this? I don't see that much opposition coming from ruling elites, whether it's in the bourgeoisie media, whether, it's with these former government officials or current government officials. Nobody from either party, really. I mean, I think I saw a really sad small attempt by Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia, to do like a War Powers Act resolution, but not very many people got on board. I don't really hear Democrats saying much of anything. So I find that really concerning because that means there's no opposition really to this insane idea that, and just to be clear, like if the U.S. goes through with this, Iran will have no choice. Like, you are giving them no choice because no country is going to unconditionally. Trump called for unconditional surrender. Like, nobody with self-respect would do that. And there's a chance they could, I guess, but I just, I don't see that happening. It's not a position any country can take. So it's like when you're pushed up against a wall, you got to fight. And they're pushing Iran up against a wall. And even if it's an uphill battle, they'll still fight. Because that is what a country will do to survive. And this is not just an attack on Iran's nuclear program. This has become an attack to collapse the Iranian state, to literally destroy the Iranian state. So they are going to fight so their state can survive. Otherwise, they'll turn out like Libya. That's the alternative outcome. And it's a country of 90 million people. So they have leverage. They can hit U.S. bases in the region. And once the U.S. hits them, there's a good chance they'll hit back. And then the U.S. will be in a war in Iran. And all these people will say, they're trying to sell this idea. Israel started the job. The U.S. can help finish it. No boots on the ground. That is bullshit. Like, you can't collapse a state without boots on the ground. You just can't do it. You can't just, destroy a state from the air. It doesn't work like that. This isn't Gaza. And even Gaza still exists and people are still fighting. And that's a place, it's not a state, it's a death camp. This is a country with huge geographic depth and actual military and 90 million people.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. No, it's a good point. I mean, the Gaza point is a very well taken point. I mean, for those who pay attention to those things, these videos are coming out pretty much every single day of people fighting the Israeli forces, despite like the just total destruction of the Gaza enclave. We saw Yemen. It was like 4 weeks and they couldn't even defeat Yemen. And they said, you know what? Like, we're just going to basically give up on that. By the way, Yemen is saying if the U.S. attacks Iran, that they will enter on the side of Iran. And
I believe Yemen when they say that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like, obviously there's no real precedent. I mean, they said Iraq was going to be like a month, I mean, mission accomplished. They said it's all going to be over. And then it actually became, a massive conflagration. So, this whole idea of these limited strikes and regime change is not going to make a big deal, blah, blah, blah. It's completely absurd. And the Libya example is very relevant because you can see how the collapse of the state in Libya led to the huge increase in the fighting in West Africa and the Sahel, into Nigeria, into even the middle belt of Nigeria, which is not the Sahel, all these different places because the huge amount of weapons that were rushing into West Africa. You're already seeing weapons leaking out of other war zones. So if Iran was to fragment in a way, I mean, a country that is adjacent to Azerbaijan and Armenia, which have a lot of fighting and discord, to Afghanistan, which there you go, to Baluchistan in Pakistan, where there's a lot of back and forth and different pieces like that, to Iraq itself. So you have all these potential pitfalls and divisions. But the thing we have to also just note here, and then I think we should probably close on this. Well, maybe not. We could keep talking, but this is actually what the Israelis want, though. Like when Netanyahu says it's not a goal, but it's probably an outcome in terms of regime change. Like if you look at the context of Likud and the context of Greater Israel and the context for their view of how West Asia should be, they want West Asia to be broken up into a large number of smaller, essentially warring principalities that are so weak they can't do anything to challenge Israel, and they're only fighting and killing each other and all these different factors. That's why they try to offer some support to the Kurds. That's why they're talking about they want to support the Druze in Syria and all this other shit. Sorry to use that word in this family show here, but this is they actually want it to be divided and in constant war and conflict and destruction. That is their strategy to help control the area, which is an extension of the broader imperial strategy that goes all the way back to the Roman Empire of divide and conquer, right? So like for the average person, this would seem terrible for a country of 90 million people to break apart, to look at the Libya precedent, to see how it could spill over into all these other countries, how tens of millions of people will almost certainly die, how the economic situation for the average person will go down in every possible way. Like anyone who is like not a horrible person would be like, wow, that sounds like a terrible outcome. But the Israelis are actually horrible people. And the things that they are doing are designed to create death, destruction, division in order to perpetuate their own totally illegitimate, control over the area on behalf and in conjunction with the U.S. and Europe, by the way, which look how quickly mayors and all these Germans and the French, they jumped on it. Yeah, Israel, bomb Iran. They were all for it. You know what I mean? So it just shows that so much of this is about the imperial control of West Asia. They won't let it go. They're not going to allow people to be self-determining without a fight.
No, and I saw the other day, there was like a Jerusalem Post. I think it was like, I don't know if it was the editorial board. It may have been. Yeah, it was the editorial board. The Jerusalem Post editorial board called for Iran to be partitioned and broken apart, to forge a Middle East, to encourage long-term plans for federalized or partitioned Iran, with guarantees to Sunni, Kurdish, and Baluchi minority regions breaking away. And I'm just like, that is literally Israel's plan for everywhere. Like, everywhere. Federalize by ethnic minorities or whatever you can. Just split it up however you can to make it easier for Israel to have absolute, like, domination and hegemony over the region. And it's caused nothing but the complete disintegration of various parts of this region, that have totally, as they like to use the word, reshaped. They like to talk about reshaping the Middle East. It's killed millions and millions and millions of people, eliminated entire minority groups that existed here for thousands of years before all of these catastrophic wars, all for the sake of domination and control. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. It's certainly shocking every single day. But, we'll be covering here at Breakthrough News, and I'll use that as a segue to remind everybody, first of all, make sure you smash that like button, you guys. It's so important to engage and boost us in the algorithm. And also make sure you're subscribed, turn on notifications so you can hit that bell to turn on notifications so that you can get a notification on your phone screen whenever we go live or have new content. And also, if you support our programming here at Breakthrough News, please consider becoming a member by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. For as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. And most importantly, you will be helping independent media bring you the actual news as it plays out, rather than the warmongering garbage I've been subjecting myself to for the last week, watching the state propaganda of America try to prime the population for war.
Yeah, well, thanks for watching it so we don't have to. Thanks for everyone watching here today. Thanks to all of our guests. For myself, for Rania, Khalek, for the whole Breakthrough News team, we will see you next time.